Sometimes the people we trust the most become the ones who hurt us the deepest. Sometimes the place we call home becomes the place we are suddenly no longer welcome. And sometimes life tests us in ways we never imagined. Today, I want to tell you a story about trust, about family, about betrayal, and about a woman who refused to let anyone take away the life she built. This is the story of Margaret. Margaret was 74 years old. She had lived in the same house for more than 40 years. It wasn't a big house, but it was filled with memories. Every wall had a story. Every chair had history. Every photograph carried a moment from a life that had been lived with love. Her husband had built that house with his own hands many years ago. He worked hard, saved every dollar, and together they created a home where their family could grow. But life changes. Years passed, her husband passed away, and Margaret was left alone in the house they had once shared. Still, she didn't feel lonely. Her son, Daniel, lived nearby. He would visit sometimes, bring groceries, fix things around the house. And Margaret believed something simple. Family always takes care of family. Recently, Daniel had married a young woman named Sophia. Sophia was beautiful, confident, smart. At least, that was the impression everyone had at the beginning. Margaret welcomed her warmly. She cooked dinners for her, invited her for tea, shared stories about the family. Margaret trusted her because she believed trust was the foundation of a family. For a while, everything seemed normal, peaceful, ordinary. But sometimes the most dangerous problems grow quietly, hidden beneath polite smiles, hidden beneath everyday conversations. And one afternoon, everything changed. It was a cold day. Margaret had gone to the grocery store, just like she did every week. She bought bread, fresh vegetables, a few apples, and her favorite tea. It was a simple routine she had followed for years. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing felt wrong. She slowly walked back to her house, carrying the grocery bag. Rain had started falling lightly. When she reached the front door, she placed the bag down for a moment. Then she took out her key, the same key she had used for 40 years. She inserted it into the lock and turned it, but the key didn't move. Margaret frowned slightly. She tried again. This time, the key moved halfway and stopped, metal grinding inside the lock like a broken machine. She tried once more. Still nothing. Now she felt confused. Why wouldn't the door open? She stepped back, looked at the lock carefully. Then suddenly, the door opened from the inside. Standing there was Sophia. Behind her stood Daniel. But something felt wrong immediately. Their expressions were cold, distant, unfamiliar. Margaret smiled gently. "I think the lock is broken," she said. But Sophia didn't smile. Instead, she looked at Margaret calmly and said something that froze the world in place. "You don't live here anymore." Margaret thought she had misunderstood. "What?" she asked quietly. Sophia repeated it, this time even colder. "You don't live here anymore, old lady." The words hit like a hammer. Margaret stood there in the rain, holding her grocery bag, her own house behind that door, her own family standing inside, and suddenly she was being told she didn't belong there. Daniel avoided her eyes. He said nothing. Sophia held a folder in her hands. Inside were papers, legal papers, property documents, power of attorney forms. She spoke as if everything had already been decided. "You can't manage the house anymore," Sophia said. Your health is declining. We are taking responsibility now." Margaret listened carefully, but inside her mind, something didn't add up. Her health was fine, her memory was sharp, and she had never signed any documents giving away her house. Sophia continued explaining as if Margaret had no choice. But Margaret had lived 74 years. She understood something important. When people speak too confidently about something that belongs to you, it usually means they are trying to take it. For a moment, silence filled the doorway. Rain falling softly behind Margaret, Daniel standing quietly behind Sophia. And then Margaret did something unexpected. She didn't scream, she didn't argue, she didn't fight. She simply said one word. "All right." Then she turned around, picked up her grocery bag, and walked away. Sophia watched her leave, certain she had won. But Margaret wasn't finished, not even close. That evening, Margaret sat at a small table in a quiet cafe. She opened her phone and began making calls. First, she called a lawyer. Then she called her bank. Then she contacted the property office. She requested documents, transaction history, legal records, signatures, everything connected to her house. Within hours, something strange began appearing. Documents that were filed very recently, requests Margaret had never approved, signatures that looked almost like hers, but not quite. Someone had been preparing a legal transfer of her property quietly, carefully, and the person behind it was much closer than Margaret had expected. Sophia. Margaret remained calm. Instead of arguing, she gathered evidence. Instead of shouting, she documented everything, every signature, every request, every suspicious detail. Because sometimes the strongest response is not anger. Sometimes it is patience. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. Police cars arrived in front of the house. Sophia opened the door confidently, but her expression changed the moment she saw the officers. They asked to come inside. They began asking questions about the documents, about the signatures, about the attempted property transfer. Sophia's voice started shaking. Daniel looked pale, and Margaret stood quietly beside the officers, watching everything unfold. For the first time, Sophia realized something. Margaret was not weak, she was not confused, and she was certainly not powerless. Kindness is often mistaken for weakness, but wisdom comes with time, and Margaret had 74 years of experience. By the end of that day, the truth had become clear. The house belonged to Margaret, and the attempt to take it was illegal. For the first time since the confrontation, Margaret walked back through the front door of her own home. The same door, the same hallway, the same photographs on the wall. Nothing had changed, but everything had changed. She placed her grocery bag on the kitchen table, slowly sat down, and took a deep breath. Because sometimes the biggest victories are quiet ones, not revenge, not anger, just truth. Truth that refuses to disappear, and dignity that refuses to be taken. Stories like this remind us of something important. Respect is not something you can steal. Trust is not something you can manipulate. And a lifetime of work cannot be erased by a few pieces of paper. Now I want to ask you something. If something like this happened to you, what would you do? Would you forgive them? Or would you fight for what is yours? Write your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you enjoy powerful real-life stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because here on Velora Stories, every story has a voice, and sometimes that voice deserves to be heard.